The dusty horizon swallowed the last rays of the setting sun, as Penelope Parker collapsed to her knees, her once fine dress now tattered and stained with the red earth of New Mexico territory. The year was 1876, and she had lost everything: her family, her home, and now, it seemed, her last shred of hope. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, where one of the bandits had struck her before leaving her for dead. They'd taken her horse, her supplies, and the small locket containing the only image she had of her parents. Alone in the vast emptiness of the desert, miles from the nearest town, Penelope pressed her palms into the dirt and whispered desperate prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking from thirst. "Send someone. Anyone!" The sound of hoofbeats made her think she was hallucinating until a shadow fell across her bowed form. She didn't look up, fearing another bandit come to finish what the others had started. "Madam?" The voice was deep, tinged with a Texas drawl. "You hurt?" Penelope raised her head slowly, squinting against the fading light. A tall figure sat atop a chestnut stallion, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn leather hat. A long rifle rested across his lap, and a star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. She tried to stand but fell back to her knees, dizzy from dehydration and exhaustion. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching her with measured steps. As he knelt beside her, she saw his face clearly. For the first time, sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Here," he said, offering his canteen. As she reached for it, he added, "Looks like you've been praying for help." Penelope nodded weakly, taking a careful sip of the precious water. The cowboy's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Name's Thomas Addison, Sheriff of Silver Creek, and I reckon I'm the answer you've been waiting for." She might have laughed at his boldness if she weren't so close to passing out. Instead, she managed to whisper her name before darkness claimed her. When Penelope awoke, she was lying on a narrow bed in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating dancing dust motes. For a moment, she thought she might have died, until the pain in her head reminded her she was very much alive. "Good morning." Sheriff Addison sat in a chair beside the bed, his hat resting on his knee. "Doc says you'll be just fine. Dehydration, exhaustion, and that nasty cut on your head. But nothing that won't heal." Penelope struggled to sit up, suddenly aware she was wearing a clean nightgown, her cheeks flushed. "Who?" "Mrs. Wilson from the boarding house," he explained quickly, understanding her concern. "I brought you straight to the doctor, and she took care of you after that. You're in Silver Creek now, safe and sound." "The bandits," she began, memories flooding back. "They took everything?" Thomas nodded grimly. "I gathered as much. Probably the Rawlins gang. They've been terrorizing travelers through the territory for months now." He leaned forward. "Can you tell me what happened? Where you were headed?" Penelope sank back against the pillows. "I was traveling to Santa Fe. My uncle has a ranch there, Crescent Moon, it's called. He's my only family now." "That's a mighty long journey for a woman alone," Thomas observed, no judgment in his voice, just concern. "I had no choice," she replied. "My father's business partner in St. Louis. After Papa died, he claimed Father owed him money. He took our home, everything we had. Said I could—" She swallowed hard. "Said I could work off the debt in his establishment. It wasn't a reputable place." Understanding darkened the sheriff's eyes. "So you ran." "I couldn't stay. I wrote to my uncle, and he sent money for the stagecoach, but it broke an axle 2 days ago. The driver said it would be a week before they could continue. I couldn't wait that long. Mr. Hollister father's partner had men looking for me, so I used what money I had left to buy a horse and provisions." "And the Rawlins gang found you." Thomas shook his head. "You're lucky to be alive, Miss Parker." "Please, call me Penelope." She met his gaze. "And yes, I know. If you hadn't come along—" "Well, I did." He stood up, placing his hat on his head. "Rest now. We can talk more later about getting you to your uncle's ranch. Silver Creek is in Santa Fe, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need." After Thomas left, Penelope lay back, staring at the ceiling. Her prayers had been answered, but she sensed her troubles were far from over. For 3 days, Penelope recuperated at the Silver Creek boarding house under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Wilson, a widow whose motherly fussing hit a spine of steel. On the 4th morning, Sheriff Addison arrived as she was finishing breakfast in the small dining room. "Morning, Miss Parker," he greeted, removing his hat. "Feeling better, I hope?" "Much better, thank you," she replied, noting the worried crease between his brows. "Is something wrong?" Thomas glanced at Mrs. Wilson, who took the hint and bustled out of the room, muttering about laundry. "I received a telegram yesterday," he said once they were alone. "From the sheriff in St. Louis. Seems there's a warrant out for your arrest." Penelope's teacup clattered against its saucer. "That's impossible. I've done nothing wrong." "The complaint was filed by a Mr. Elias Hollister," Thomas continued. "Says you stole money and jewelry before disappearing." "That's a lie!" Penelope stood abruptly, anger flushing her cheeks. "Everything I took belonged to me, my mother's brooch, and the money my uncle sent for my passage. Hollister is the thief, not me." Thomas raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I believe you, Miss Parker. Hollister's reputation precedes him, even out here, but the law's the law, and if another lawman passes through—" "You'll have to turn me in," she finished, sinking back into her chair. "Not necessarily." He sat across from her, leaning forward. "The way I see it, we have a few options. First, you could continue to your uncle's ranch. Once you're under his protection, Hollister might back down." "And the other options?" Penelope asked, sensing his hesitation. "We could send a telegram to the territorial marshal, explain the situation. Might take time, but if your uncle can vouch for you." "And the third option?" Thomas sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "I could escort you to Santa Fe myself, safer than traveling alone, and I'd be responsible for you as well, not quite a prisoner." "Why would you do that?" Penelope searched his face, finding nothing but earnest concern there. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "And because I don't think you'd last another day alone out there, especially with the Rawlins gang still at large." Before she could respond, the door burst open, and a young boy of about 12 rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Sheriff, they robbed the bank in Copper Springs. The telegraph operator just got word." Thomas was on his feet instantly. "Casualties?" "Shot the teller dead, took off toward the hills." The boy glanced at Penelope, then back to the sheriff. "They're saying it was the Rawlins gang." A muscle ticked in Thomas's jaw. "Thank you, Jimmy. Tell Ben to ready a posse. I'll be right there." When the boy had gone, Thomas turned back to Penelope. "I have to go. This changes things. If I leave town, they might send someone else for me," she finished. He nodded grimly. "Stay here. Don't leave Mrs. Wilson's sight. When I get back, we'll figure this out." Penelope watched him stride out, purpose in every step. For the first time in days, the fear that had been her constant companion swelled again. If Thomas didn't return, but he did return, 3 days later, mud-splattered and grim-faced, with a bullet graze across his left bicep. Penelope was helping Mrs. Wilson peel potatoes in the kitchen when he appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff!" Mrs. Wilson exclaimed. "Land's sakes! You look half dead. Sit down before you fall down." Thomas obeyed, wincing as he settled into a chair. His eyes found Penelope's. "We got 2 of them. The rest escaped, including Rawlins himself." Penelope set down her knife and moved to examine his arm. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he insisted, though he didn't pull away from her touch. Mrs. Wilson snorted. "Nothing," he says. "Men, I'll fetch some clean bandages and my salve." She bustled out, leaving them alone. "Did you see—" Penelope began. "Your things?" Thomas shook his head. "No sign of them. I'm sorry." Penelope swallowed her disappointment. The locket had been her most precious possession, but she was alive, which was more than could be said for the bank teller in Copper Springs. "What happens now?" she asked softly, beginning to clean the wound with a damp cloth. "I've been thinking about that." Thomas watched her work, his blue eyes serious. "I can't leave town again so soon, not with the Rawlins gang still out there, but I can't in good conscience keep you here with that warrant hanging over your head." "So I should go?" The thought of traveling alone again filled her with dread. "No." His hand covered hers, stilling her movements. I have another idea. It's unconventional. Penelope raised her eyebrows. I'm listening. Marry me. The cloth dropped from her fingers. I beg your pardon? As my wife, you'd be under my protection, he explained, his voice steady despite the audacity of his proposal. The law views a husband and wife as one entity in many respects. It would complicate matters for Hollister significantly. You're suggesting marriage as a legal maneuver? Penelope wasn't sure whether to laugh or be offended. Initially, yes, Thomas admitted, but I wouldn't expect... He paused, gathering his thoughts. It would be a marriage in name only, until you decide otherwise. You'd have your own room at my house. When things settle down, if you still want to go to your uncle's, I wouldn't stop you. You would do that for a woman you've known less than a week? His eyes held hers steadily. I would do that for you, Penelope Parker, because in less than a week, I've come to care what happens to you, and because I'm the answer to those prayers you were whispering when I found you. There it was again, that bold statement. This time, however, instead of seeming presumptuous, his words struck her as possibly, improbably true. I need time to think, she said finally. Thomas nodded. Of course, but not too much time. Deputy Collins saw a stranger in town yesterday, asking questions about new arrivals. Could be nothing, could be one of Hollister's men. That night, Penelope barely slept, turning Thomas's proposal over in her mind. By morning, she had made her decision. She found him at the sheriff's office, reviewing wanted posters. When she entered, he stood immediately, his expression cautiously hopeful. Yes, she said simply. I accept your proposal. Relief washed over his features. You're sure? No, she admitted with a small laugh. But I trust you, Thomas Addison, and that's more than I can say for most men I've known. They were married that afternoon by the town's preacher, with Mrs. Wilson and Deputy Collins as witnesses. Penelope wore a borrowed blue dress, and Thomas looked uncomfortable but handsome in a clean shirt and string tie. The ceremony was brief, practical, exactly the type of arrangement they had agreed to. Yet when Thomas gently kissed her at the preacher's instruction, Penelope felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. His home was modest but well kept, a 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town, with a small garden and a stable for his horse. He showed her to the spare room, which he had hastily cleared of storage items. It's not much, he apologized, but it's yours for as long as you want it. It's perfect, she assured him, touched by his consideration. That evening, they ate a simple supper that Thomas prepared, discovering they shared a love of literature and music. Despite the unusual circumstances, conversation flowed easily between them. Why did you become a sheriff? Penelope asked as they washed the dishes together. Thomas was quiet for a moment. My father was killed by outlaws when I was 14. Our ranch in Texas was raided while he was moving cattle to market. The local sheriff caught the men, made sure justice was served. His hands stilled on the plate he was drying. I decided then that's what I wanted to do, protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Penelope's heart ached for the boy he had been. You've done that for me, she said softly. His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that made her breath catch. Get some rest, Penelope. Tomorrow's a new day. The new day brought unexpected challenges. As Penelope was shopping for supplies at the general store, she overheard 2 women whispering. Married after knowing her less than a week, one said. Makes you wonder what kind of woman she really is. Probably trapped him, the other replied. Men like Sheriff Addison don't just marry strangers without reason. Penelope kept her head high as she completed her purchases, but the words stung. Back at the cottage, she found Thomas cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table. Town's talking, she said without preamble. He looked up, instantly alert to her distress. About us? About me, she corrected. The mysterious woman who ensnared the upstanding sheriff. Thomas set down the cleaning cloth. People always talk. It'll pass once they get to know you. Will it? Penelope sank into a chair across from him. What if Hollister's man comes to town? What if everyone learns there's a warrant for my arrest? You've put your reputation at risk for me. My reputation can withstand a few gossips, he said firmly. As for the rest, we'll face that if it happens. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Thomas answered it, speaking briefly with someone Penelope couldn't see. When he returned, his expression was grim. Deputy Collins spotted a man at the hotel matching the description I gave him of Hollister's right-hand man, Vernon Scully. If it's him, he'll come sniffing around soon enough. Penelope's stomach clenched with fear. What do we do? We don't hide, Thomas decided. Tonight's the town social at the church hall. We're going to attend, as husband and wife, and show everyone there's nothing suspicious about our marriage. That seems bold, Penelope said uncertainly. Bold is better than fearful, Thomas replied. Trust me on this. The social was already in full swing when they arrived that evening, Penelope wearing her borrowed blue dress again, and Thomas in his best shirt. Conversation faltered momentarily as they entered, then resumed with increased intensity. Thomas placed a protective hand at the small of her back. Smile, he murmured. You look beautiful, and you have every right to be here. His confidence bolstered her own. Together, they moved through the crowd, Thomas introducing her to those she hadn't yet met. Some were openly curious, others politely reserved, but none were outright hostile. When the fiddle player struck up a waltz, Thomas turned to her with a raised eyebrow. Mrs. Addison, may I have this dance? The name her new name still felt strange, but not unpleasant. She took his offered hand. You may, Sheriff Addison. He was a surprisingly good dancer, leading her confidently around the floor. Penelope was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the slight pressure of his fingers against hers. This close, she could see flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the tiny scar at his temple, the way the corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher on the right when he smiled. You're staring, he murmured, amusement in his voice. I'm memorizing, she corrected, in case I need to describe my husband to someone. His smile deepened. And what would you say? That he's far too handsome for his own good, and knows it too. Thomas laughed, a warm sound that made several heads turn. Is that so? It is, she confirmed, surprised by her own boldness. I'd also say he's kind and honorable, perhaps to a fault. Something shifted in his gaze, the amusement replaced by an intensity that made her breath catch. Penelope. Well, if it isn't the town sheriff and his new bride. The intrusion came from a tall, sallow-faced man, with cold eyes and a thin mustache. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching them with undisguised interest. Thomas's arm tightened around Penelope's waist. Evening, stranger. Don't believe we've met. Vernon Scully. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just passing through on business, though I must say, I'm surprised to find Sheriff Addison a married man. Word in neighboring towns is you were quite the confirmed bachelor. Things change, Thomas replied evenly. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Scully, I'd like to finish this dance with my wife. But Scully stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Penelope. Your wife looks familiar. Have we met before, Mrs. Addison? Penelope's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. I don't believe so, Mr. Scully. I'm new to these parts. Where are you from originally? He persisted. Thomas intervened smoothly. My wife doesn't appreciate being interrogated, Mr. Scully, especially not during a social gathering. If you have legitimate business in Silver Creek, I'd be happy to discuss it at my office tomorrow. Scully stepped back, touching his hat brim in mock deference. Of course, Sheriff. My apologies, Mrs. Addison. Enjoy your evening. As he walked away, Penelope released the breath she'd been holding. It's him, Hollister's man. I know, Thomas murmured, guiding her toward the refreshment table. Keep smiling. We're not giving him the satisfaction of seeing you afraid. What happens now? She whispered. Now, we finish our evening like any other couple. Tomorrow, I'll deal with Scully. But Scully wasn't waiting until tomorrow. As they were leaving the social, he appeared again, this time with the town's telegraph operator in tow. Sheriff Addison, the operator called, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Scully here says it's urgent official business. He asked me to confirm if you'd received any telegrams regarding a fugitive woman from St. Louis. Thomas's expression remained impassive. And what did you tell him, Jim? That all official communications to the sheriff's office are confidential, Jim replied, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool evening. Scully stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his hip, where a pistol was undoubtedly concealed. I represent Mr. Elias Hollister of St. Louis, a prominent businessman. We're searching for a young woman named Penelope Parker, who stole valuable items before fleeing the city. There's a substantial reward for her return." Several townspeople who had been leaving the social stopped to listen. Thomas positioned himself slightly in front of Penelope. "As I said earlier, Mr. Scully, if you have official business, we can discuss it at my office in the morning." Thomas's voice was calm, but Penelope could sense the tension in his body. "For now, I'm taking my wife home." "Your wife?" Scully repeated, his thin lips curving in a predatory smile. "How interesting that you married so suddenly, Sheriff. Almost as if you were protecting someone." Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. Thomas's hand moved toward his own pistol. "That's enough," came a firm voice from behind them. Mrs. Wilson pushed through the onlookers, her expression thunderous. "I don't know who you think you are, mister, but in Silver Creek, we don't accost our sheriff and his bride outside church socials." "This isn't your concern, madam," Scully said dismissively. "Like hell it isn't," Mrs. Wilson retorted, drawing gasps from the more proper ladies present. "Penelope Parker Addison is as fine a young woman as I've ever met. And if Sheriff Addison had the good sense to marry her, that's all the character reference she needs in this town." Several voices murmured in agreement. Scully's eyes narrowed as he assessed the shifting mood of the crowd. "This isn't over," he said quietly, directed more at Penelope than Thomas. Then he turned on his heel and stalked away toward the hotel. The walk home was tense and silent. Once inside, Thomas bolted the door and checked that all windows were secure. "He knows," Penelope said, sinking onto the sofa. "He knows exactly who I am." "Yes," Thomas agreed, removing his gun belt and setting it within easy reach. "But he can't prove it yet. Not with the town rallying behind you." Mrs. Wilson's intervention was unexpected but welcome. "She's been kind to me from the beginning," Penelope said, grateful for the older woman's support. "But Thomas, what happens when Scully sends to St. Louis for confirmation? For a copy of the warrant?" Thomas sat beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. "By then, we'll have a plan. I promise you, Penelope. I won't let Hollister get his hands on you." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Why are you doing all this for me? The truth, Thomas." He was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. "When I found you in the desert, praying in the dirt, something inside me shifted. I've rescued people before, it's my job. But with you, it was different." His blue eyes met hers, unguarded. "I told myself it was just duty, just doing right by someone in need. But it's more than that now." "What is it then?" she whispered, though she thought she knew the answer, could feel it in the quickening of her own heart. Instead of replying with words, Thomas leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he kissed her. A gentle press of lips that held nothing of duty and everything of genuine feeling. When they parted, Penelope kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the warmth that spread through her. "That wasn't part of our arrangement," she murmured. "No," he agreed, his voice rough. "I can stop if you want." She opened her eyes, finding his gaze intent upon her. "I don't want you to stop." This time when they kissed, there was nothing tentative about it. Thomas's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Penelope wound her fingers into his hair, marveling at how right it felt to be held by him. What had begun as a practical arrangement was rapidly becoming something far more complicated and far more precious. A gunshot shattered the moment, the window behind them exploding in a shower of glass. Thomas reacted instantly, pulling Penelope to the floor and covering her body with his own as a second shot splintered the doorframe. "Stay down," he ordered, reaching for his pistol. He crawled to the window, keeping low, and peered cautiously over the sill. "Can't see anyone, but they're out there." Penelope's heart thundered in her chest. "Scully?" "Most likely." Thomas moved toward the back of the house. "We need to get out of here. They know exactly where we are." "Where can we go?" Panic edged her voice. "My deputy has a place outside town. We'll head there and regroup." He grabbed his rifle from its rack and handed Penelope his spare revolver. "You know how to use this?" She nodded, accepting the weapon with steady hands. Her father had taught her to shoot years ago, insisting that a woman living in the West should know how to defend herself. "Good." Thomas moved to a cabinet, withdrawing ammunition and stuffing it into his pockets. "We'll go out the back, through the garden. Stay low, stay close." They slipped out the back door into the darkness, crouching among the vegetable plants as they made their way toward the stable. Another shot rang out, closer this time. "They're circling around," Thomas whispered. "Run for the stable on my signal." He fired twice in the direction of the shots, then grabbed her hand. "Now!" They sprinted across the open ground, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. Inside the stable, Thomas quickly saddled his chestnut stallion while Penelope kept watch at the door. "We'll have to ride double," he said, leading the horse out. "It'll slow us down, but we don't have time to saddle another mount." He helped her up, then swung into the saddle behind her, one arm secure around her waist as he took the reins. They burst from the stable at a gallop, heading away from town toward the foothills. Behind them, shouts erupted, followed by more gunfire. Penelope felt something hot graze her arm, but bit back a cry. Thomas urged the horse faster, taking them down a shallow creek bed where the water would mask their tracks. For nearly an hour they rode hard, the sounds of pursuit gradually fading. Finally, Thomas slowed their pace, guiding the horse up a narrow trail that wound through pine trees. "Are you all right?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," she answered, though her arm stung fiercely. "Are we safe?" "For now." He pointed ahead to a small cabin nestled among the trees. "Deputy Collins uses this place during hunting season. No one else knows about it." The cabin was simple but secure, one room with a stone fireplace, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and basic provisions. Thomas tended to the horse while Penelope examined her arm by the light of a lantern. The bullet had only grazed her, leaving a shallow furrow that bled but wasn't serious. When Thomas returned, he insisted on cleaning and bandaging the wound, his touch gentle despite the concern etched on his features. "I'm sorry," he said as he worked. "I should have anticipated Scully would move this quickly." "It's not your fault," Penelope assured him. "You've risked everything for me already." He finished tying the bandage, but his hands lingered on her arm. "I'd risk more." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Thomas, I know our marriage was meant to be temporary," he said quietly, "a means to protect you. But I need you to know that for me, it's become much more than that." Penelope raised her hand to his cheek, feeling the stubble rough against her palm. "For me as well." This time when they kissed, there was no interruption, no danger lurking outside, just the two of them, finding in each other a love neither had expected, but both now recognized as true. When Thomas led her to the narrow bed, Penelope went willingly, surrendering to feelings she had never thought to experience. Later, wrapped in his arms beneath a rough woolen blanket, she traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "What happens now?" she asked. Thomas kissed her forehead, his expression thoughtful. "We can't run forever. Sooner or later, we have to face Scully and whatever he has planned." "You have an idea," Penelope observed, recognizing the calculating look in his eyes. "I do," he admitted, "but you won't like it." By dawn, they had formed a plan. Risky, potentially dangerous, but possibly their only chance to free Penelope from Hollister's reach forever. They rode back toward town as the sun crested the horizon, taking a circuitous route to avoid being spotted. Instead of entering Silver Creek directly, they stopped at a small farm on the outskirts where Mrs. Wilson's married daughter lived. The woman welcomed them without question, offering breakfast and a place to clean up, while Thomas sent her husband to town with a message for Deputy Collins. "Are you certain about this?" Mrs. Wilson's daughter asked Penelope as she helped her change into a clean dress. "It sounds awfully dangerous." "I'm certain," Penelope replied, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "It's the only way." By midday, everything was in place. Thomas kissed her one last time before they parted, his expression grave. "Remember," he said, "no matter what happens, no matter what I say or do, trust that I love you and I will protect you." "I trust you," she promised, squeezing his hands. "With my life and my heart." They entered Silver Creek separately, Thomas first, riding boldly down the main street as if returning from regular patrol. Half an hour later, Penelope slipped into town alone, making her way to the church where Father Matthews waited as planned. She had just reached the church steps when a familiar voice called out behind her. "Miss Parker, or should I say, Mrs. Addison." Penelope turned slowly to face Vernon Scully, who stood in the street with two rough-looking men flanking him. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. "Mr. Scully," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "I have no business with you." "On the contrary," Scully smiled coldly, "you have a debt to repay to Mr. Hollister, and I'm here to collect it." "The only debt I owe is to God," Penelope replied, loud enough for onlookers to hear, "which is why I've come to pray." Scully's face twisted with impatience. "Enough games? I have a warrant for your arrest, Miss Parker. You'll be returning to St. Louis with me today." "She goes nowhere with you." Thomas appeared at the end of the street, Deputy Collins at his side. They approached slowly, deliberately, hands hovering near their weapons. "Sheriff," Scully greeted with mock politeness, "I'm conducting legitimate business. This woman is wanted for theft in St. Louis." "So you claim," Thomas replied, "but I've received some interesting telegrams this morning, Mr. Scully, from the St. Louis police chief himself and from a federal marshal. Would you like to know what they said?" Uncertainty flickered across Scully's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Thomas withdrew a paper from his vest pocket. "This is a statement from Police Chief Montgomery, confirming that one Elias Hollister is under investigation for fraud, extortion, and other crimes. The warrant against Miss Parker issued by a judge, now also under investigation, has been suspended pending review." Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Scully's face darkened with anger. "You can't interfere with my lawful duties," he snarled. "Your duties?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "According to the marshal's office, you're not a lawman, Mr. Scully. You're Hollister's hired thug, and you have no authority here or anywhere else." Scully's hand moved toward his gun. "I'm taking her back, one way or another." "No," Thomas said calmly. "You're not." For a tense moment, Penelope thought violence was inevitable. Then another voice cut through the standoff. "I believe I can clarify matters further." All heads turned toward an elegant older man descending from a carriage that had just arrived. Tall and distinguished, with silver-streaked dark hair and Penelope's same green eyes, he surveyed the scene with evident displeasure. "Uncle James!" Penelope gasped. James Parker approached, stopping beside his niece and placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Mr. Scully, I presume, your employer has been troubling my family for quite long enough." "Who the hell are you?" Scully demanded. "James Parker, owner of the Crescent Moon Ranch and regional representative to the territorial legislature." Her uncle's voice carried the weight of authority. "And guardian to my niece Penelope, whose property was illegally seized by your employer after my brother's death." Thomas stepped forward. "Mr. Parker arrived in response to our telegram. He's brought documents proving that Hollister falsified debts and used corrupt officials to steal the Parker estate." "Which means," Deputy Collins added cheerfully, "that you, Scully, have been pursuing an innocent woman for a crime that never happened." Scully's face contorted with rage. "This changes nothing. I have my orders." "Your orders are meaningless," James Parker stated, "especially now that federal marshals are investigating Hollister. In fact, I suspect they'll be very interested in questioning you, Mr. Scully, about your role in Hollister's operations." Realizing he was outmaneuvered, Scully made his desperate move. In one fluid motion, he drew his pistol and lunged toward Penelope, clearly intending to use her as leverage. But Thomas was faster. His gun barked once, and Scully stumbled, a look of surprise crossing his face as he clutched his shoulder. His own shot went wild, shattering a shop window across the street. Before his companions could react, Deputy Collins and several townsmen had them covered. "That was foolish," Thomas said, approaching the wounded Scully. "You've just added attempted kidnapping and assault to your charges. Deputy, take these men to the jail. I believe the marshal will be most interested in speaking with them when he arrives tomorrow." As Scully and his men were led away, the tension in the street dissipated. Thomas turned to Penelope and her uncle, holstering his weapon. "Mr. Parker, I'm Thomas Addison. Thank you for coming so quickly." "Thank you for protecting my niece, Sheriff." James Parker extended his hand, which Thomas shook firmly. "Though I understand congratulations are in order as well." Penelope's letter mentioned a marriage. Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Uncle James, I can explain." "No need, my dear," her uncle smiled. "I gathered from your letter that it was initially an arrangement of convenience, but the way this young man looks at you suggests it's become considerably more than that." Thomas's eyes met Penelope's, love clear in their blue depths. "Yes, sir, it has." James Parker looked between them, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Well then, I believe we have much to discuss. Perhaps over dinner? I've taken rooms at the hotel, and I'd be honored if you'd both join me." That evening, as they shared a meal with her uncle, Penelope learned how Thomas had telegraphed not only to James Parker, but to contacts in the territorial capital and St. Louis, working tirelessly to uncover the truth about Hollister's schemes. Her uncle, upon receiving Thomas's urgent message, had immediately gathered the necessary documentation and traveled day and night to reach Silver Creek. "Hollister has been exposed," James explained. "His creditors are closing in, and the authorities have frozen his assets pending investigation. He'll never trouble you again, Penelope." "What about my father's house, our belongings?" she asked. "Many items were sold, I'm afraid," her uncle replied. "But the house itself remains. And with Hollister's fraudulent claims invalidated, it rightfully belongs to you. I've initiated proceedings to reclaim it on your behalf." Penelope felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of injustice she had carried since her father's death. "Thank you, Uncle James, for everything." Later, as Thomas walked with her and her uncle back to the hotel, James tactfully excused himself to give them a moment alone. "You did all this," Penelope marveled, looking up at Thomas in the soft glow of the street lamps. "You unraveled Hollister's entire scheme in a matter of days." "I had help," Thomas said modestly, "and powerful motivation." He took her hands in his. "Your uncle has invited us to visit the Crescent Moon. He seems to think I might enjoy ranching as much as law enforcement." "And would you?" Penelope asked, searching his face. "Would you consider leaving Silver Creek?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "Silver Creek has been my home for 5 years. I've done good work here." He squeezed her hands gently. "But home isn't always a place, Penelope. Sometimes it's a person." Her heart swelled with emotion. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that whether we stay here, go to Santa Fe, or travel to the moon, I want to be with you." He drew her closer. "Our marriage began as protection, but it's become the most real thing in my life. I love you, Penelope Addison." "And I love you, Thomas Addison," she whispered back, rising on her toes to kiss him. "More than I ever thought possible." A year later, Penelope stood on the porch of their new home, a modest but comfortable house on the edge of the Crescent Moon Ranch property. Thomas had indeed taken to ranching, though he still served as a deputy marshal when needed, helping to maintain peace in the growing territory. Hollister was in prison, his criminal empire dismantled. Scully had turned state's evidence against his former employer in exchange for a reduced sentence. The Parker family home in St. Louis had been sold, the proceeds allowing Penelope and Thomas to establish their own place near her uncle's ranch. As the setting sun painted the distant mountains gold and crimson, Thomas joined her on the porch, wrapping his arms around her expanding waistline. "How are you feeling?" he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Wonderful," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "The baby was quite active today." His hands spread protectively over her belly. "Takes after his mother, strong-willed and determined." "Or her father," Penelope countered with a smile, "steadfast and brave." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. Penelope thought back to that desperate day when she had lain in the dirt, whispering prayers for salvation. How differently everything might have turned out if Thomas hadn't found her in that precise moment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, always attuned to her moods. "About prayers," she answered honestly, "and how sometimes the answers come in ways we never expected." Thomas turned her in his arms, his blue eyes reflecting the last light of day. "I told you I was the answer you'd been waiting for," he reminded her with a smile. "You just didn't believe me." "I believe you now," Penelope whispered, rising to meet his kiss as the first star of evening shimmered overhead, bearing witness to a love that had begun in desperate circumstances, but would endure through all the seasons of their lives. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Penelope placed Thomas's hand over the spot where their child kicked steadily. This was their future, a life built from the ashes of her past, stronger and more beautiful than anything she could have imagined when she fled St. Louis. "Thank you," she murmured sleepily. "For what?" Thomas asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "For finding me, for believing in me, for loving me." He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "I'll always find you, Penelope, no matter what." As she drifted toward sleep, safe in her husband's arms, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that some prayers were answered not with thunder and lightning, but with the steady presence of love that would never falter, never fail, through all the joys and sorrows that life would bring. And in the years that followed, through the birth of their children, through drought and prosperity, through all the challenges of carving out a life in the still wild territory, Thomas and Penelope Addison remained each other's strength, each other's home, each other's answered prayer. Their story became something of a legend in the region, how a desperate woman, whispering prayers in the dirt, had found not just rescue, but true love in the most unlikely of circumstances. And on quiet evenings when neighbors gathered to share tales, someone would inevitably ask to hear again about the sheriff and the woman he'd saved, and how a marriage of convenience had transformed into one of the greatest love stories the territory had ever known.